What about you, Homa? What do you feel?
I got an opportunity, in fact, last year to meet a young non-Muslim girl, and I felt very blessed that she was placed in my home by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I taught her how to read, how to pray, and she was very willing and open, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this thing in her heart that she came to me and she asked me that she would like to do fasting. So I says, if you would like to do fasting, the first thing first, you have to know how to do, how to wash yourself, how to pray salah, and then the fasting comes. And then so I was, as you mentioned earlier, that asked everybody, whoever close to you, to come and read Quran and to know what's in there. And I gave her a book, and she was a Spanish girl, and somebody brought her a Spanish translation. And mashallah, she started reading that, and then she found out so many things similar in the Bible, in the Quran. And it was surprising that how you can invite people, invite them.
You know, as if we look at, as you mentioned, Saeed, about Islam and contribution, one of the things where, you know, when we study the history of the West and Europe, we talk about medieval times. And when you talk about medieval times, as I was reading for one of the Western philosophers, he said it's not fair to call it medieval times because it was medieval for the European, but there was universities, there was knowledge, there was science in all the Muslim nations. There was so much. So yes, while the, you know, the Europe was living in the Dark Ages, there was other civilizations who were growing and contributing. So he said, you know, it's just some kind of arrogance to call it Dark Ages, medieval times, when in Spain, the Muslim nation in Spain was flourishing. People from France and England and Rome would go to Spain to learn, and that's where the universities. So, you know, you have to look at the contribution as a whole rather than one piece. So we find, you know, some people objected when I said this. The seeds of the current civilization we live in started with the Muslim nations, and yes, we dropped the ball, and the West took it and brought it to where it is today.
And just adding about that, in that period, if we studied how the Muslims interacted with each other, we would see the role of the mosque at that time would be more of a community center where people would get to know each other and where they would learn all kinds of sciences, not just Islam, but science, math, and all that place. And we see over a period of time, just like you said, the West picked up the ball, and now they're picking up with it. Alhamdulillah, you see many Muslims today realizing that what Islam's golden age was, and going through institutions where we're now encompassing all types of knowledge, Islamic, world knowledge, science, and we're teaching it all under the same institutions. So we're seeing some of the past being relived, and hopefully that's a good sign.
I wanna just say personally myself, you know, about Islam and what it has done for me, and at a very small point, is that when I think about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I never really read the Quran. I read it in school because I had to read the Quran. But when I started reading the Quran, and actually not just reading the Quran, reading the translation and the meaning and the different books about different things, so that you can learn a little bit more about that. And it really changed a lot inside of me. And if anything, it softened me. It made me a better mother, a better person within my family, with my friends, and it just made me a bit different. It made me, sometimes I feel not as arrogant, not as you know, the edges were sharp and they got softened. I mean, a different light became within me. So that's my personal issue with Quran, and I hope that some people would get that, even if they're not Muslim, even if the Quran doesn't. They don't have to become Muslims, but just something to reach within them. And
this is, if nothing else, if we look at, say, what did Prophet Muhammad ﷺ bring? You look, there's 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. And if you ask each one of them, he would tell you, it changed my life. It contributes. Whether he's poor or rich, you know, we live in a materialistic society where they only look at, are they poor or rich? But you go in the poorest part of the world and he's a Muslim and he tell you, it gives me joy, it changed my life, it affects. So if nothing else, it affected and brightened the life of 1.5 billion. However, you know, one important thing, and I remember in the early 80s, there was a study done, the greatest man in history. And they reviewed who was the man who had the most effect on history. And it was by a Westerner, it was a non-Muslim. And after reviewing all the factors, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was elected the greatest man in history. We as Muslims, we didn't have to do a study to know that he is the greatest man. But it's very interesting that a Westerner would study and review all the criteria. Who had the impact? Who had the effect? And if you would find, and I invite people to go and study, review this. It came out in the early 80s, and it was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the answer to those who says, what did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam bring us new? Go and review this study and find out the impact of Prophet Muhammad, what he had, how he impacted history, how not only the Muslims, because if we look, Islam brought the rights of women. Yes, how some Muslims treat women right now is wrong, but the equality and bringing the equality between men and women, it started with Islam. So this is a lot of the things that Islam has offered. I invite you to go and read, to go and find out more about Islam, find out about the Quran. There's much more to cover, but we've run out of time. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.